Hello, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our webinar, Rolling Out Charging Infrastructures. It's the second webinar in our e-mobility webinar series brought to you by the Interreg Europe Policy Learning Platform. My name is Katharina Krell. I'm thematic expert for low carbon economy at the Interreg Europe Policy Learning Platform, and I'm your main moderator this afternoon. I have the pleasure of having a co-moderator today. It is Nikos Ntaras from CRES. CRES is the Center for Renewable Energy Sources and Savings, which is the Greek National Center for Promoting Renewables and Energy Efficiency. Nikos, great to have you. And Nikos is also coordinator of the Interreg Europe e-MOBICITY project, one of the 7 Interreg Europe projects dedicated to e-mobility. I would also like to introduce my colleagues. So there is Simon Hunkin, thematic expert like myself, and rapporteur manning the chat and reporting your questions to the speakers today. And there is Eugénie Supplisson, from our communication team, responsible for running the webinar software smoothly. Okay, so before we start in the thematic field, a few words about the rules of the game. As usually, we are recording this webinar, and we will make the recordings and all presentations available in an online article very soon after the webinar. You can already watch the recordings and check out the presentations from last Tuesday, when we were talking about electrifying public transport and mainly buses. The audience is automatically muted, so you do not need to watch to turn on or off your mic. You are by default silent. However, you can interact with us. We would ask you to only use the chat and not the questions and answers, so that we find all your conversations in one place. You have the chat at the bottom of your webinar control panel. There is also the function to raise your hand. If you indicate that, we will understand that you would like to ask a question yourself, speaking out loud to one of our presenters after the presentation. If you raise your hand, we will give you the floor and ask you to ask your question directly to our presenters. So don't hesitate to make use of these functions. All right. A word about us, the organizers of this webinar, and what better way to present us than with our little brand new short video about the policy learning platform. Eugénie, please.
Imagine if you could easily find solutions to make your region or city smarter, greener, better connected, more social, and closer to citizens. The Interreg Europe Policy Learning Platform can help you access knowledge about the latest policy trends, discover expert-validated good practices from all over Europe, find solutions in our peer review, get tailored support from our expert team. We can connect you with the right people and organizations. Together, we will find ways to solve your region's or city's challenges. Start your policy learning journey today.
Yes, indeed, the policy learning platform services are open to all public entities, not limited to those who are participating in an Interreg Europe project. These services are free of charge. Even the individual services, such as a 2-day peer review or a 2-hour matchmaking, where we match public bodies that have a specific policy challenge with 3 to 5 experts that we handpick and bring together in a peer review or in a matchmaking. You only need to make a short request, and you can check out the link to request these services in the chat. So our topic today is charging infrastructures for e-vehicles of all types. Charging infrastructure, of course, is the backbone that we need to be able to comfortably move about. in electric cars and buses, just like the current fueling infrastructure is allowing us to roam seamlessly in our diesel and petrol cars all over the world, essentially. Now, for electric charging, we are far from the situation where market players abide by a common standard that makes all fueling stations compatible with all types of cars, aside a little difference for trucks and cars, but essentially also with price signals that everybody understands. But every new energy technology needs public support first. The same goes for e-mobility, and of course for the related charging infrastructure. Now, much of this infrastructure is indeed located in our towns and in the roads, in the feeder roads that link them to the hinterland that is used for commuting and so on. And this is the territory that local and regional policymakers and administrations are responsible for. These are our main target in our webinar series. And our 4 presenters today will highlight different aspects of charging infrastructure and try to draw first lesson of relevance to local and regional policymaking. And with this, I would like to introduce our agenda and our speakers. Please turn on your cameras while I present you to the audience. So we are starting off with a keynote from Guido Piccoli from ALOT from Italy. Where are you? I cannot see you on the camera, but maybe
I'm here in any case. Good afternoon.
Yeah, there you are. Good.
Yeah.
I cannot see all the videos. Guido is joining us from the e-MOPOLI project. After that, we are having 3 policy changes or good practices from Interreg Europe projects, starting off with Stephanie Keßler from the city of Hamburg, and who will elaborate about charging decisions about charging infrastructure for e-buses, followed by a presentation from Portugal, from MOBI.E, from the Portuguese Electric Mobility Network, delivered by Gonçalo Pacheco. Hi, Gonçalo. He's joining us from eMOBICITY. And following that and concluding is a presentation from Maria Zarkadoula from CRES in Greece as well, from eMOBICITY. And Maria is going to present different options for charging tariffs and how these can or cannot give signals to consumers on when to charge. All right, this will be followed by little panel discussions, then we will wrap up. Okay. So before handing over to Guido for his keynote, let's just ask the audience in a little poll. Have you ever used electric charging infrastructure for an e-vehicle? Yes or no? So I can already tell you that my answer is no. Whenever I see some, I walk around it, I take pictures, I read everything that is written, but I have never used it myself. So how about you? Let's see the results. I bet something like 50-50. Aha, no, more in the no than in the yes. Yeah, 62% no. Well, good. Then we are at the right time of experience, and let's hear something from our expert, who I hope have all used the electric charging infrastructure that they're talking about to us. Guido, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon again. I suppose you can see my screen. I'm a transport economist and dealing with the e-mobility since the last 10 years, particularly with my company supporting public administration on the fusion of e-mobility in different branches and area. We are leading and supporting the project e-MOPOLI, which was really an opportunity to face from North Europe to South Europe, East, West, every country, the different experience of maturity. So I'm really pleased to share some thought about how to support the diffusion, the e-charging stations, and in general the e-mobility in terms of this dilemma among chicken and eggs, which one should come first between user and public administration, between technology and policy. We have ambitious challenges to achieve based on what we expect as citizens, but also addressed by the European policies up to really zero emission on transport. Therefore, the need to use e-mobility or alternative like hydrogen as soon as possible and diffuse those alternatives among users and creating good business opportunity for the private operators. We have different key factors, starting from autonomous mobility, intelligent traffic management, the alternative also using different transport modes, modal shift, the fuel prices or increasing alternative as a fuel options or the link with the renewable energy as well as transport decarbonization in general. So technically, we have all the options available. We have a strong diffusion of the vehicles concerning e-mobility, particularly in the field of cars and buses, which were really the first on the frontier to diffuse e-mobility. But then obviously we have alternatives to be diffused in other soft mobility, as well as heavy transport like heavy trucks, as well up to rail systems, which is always traditionally more electric, up to vessels. On the other side, we faced a really strong increasing of ECS diffusion in Europe during the last period, particularly for the normal charges, but also fast charges. And therefore, we are facing to a good diffusion and good mapping of those infrastructure in Europe. But we say not yet enough. Not yet enough, even if the business model, the users are simple, nice, available. We have both for vehicles internally for private user like wallbox or in the parking lot, as well as other alternative with cables along the way, as well for the diffusion also perception for buses. And we will see a future long presentation on conductive charging via cable or pantograph system. So the diffusion is rising. The power are high. We are talking more than 400 kilowatt available for the car. So means that we're currently able for some vehicles to charge in a few minutes for a way to have a few hundred kilometers availability. It's not only about the ECS, it's about also different trends, different models that are facing in the last period, taking the coupling of energy efficiency or renewable energy with mobility through the pivot, the hub, the point, the link of the ECS. To short the description of those new trends or charging technologies available, we have divided in 3 groups. Let's say in short terms, 5 years, we have a dynamic load balancing system. We have a simple system of payment. We have a option to have equipment with onboard batteries and so on. We have an alternative coming soon, let's say sooner, not so soon, but in 5-10 years, about energy storage on the ECS to have a less load on the network, of course. We have the option for V1G or moreover vehicle-to-grid solution, which is also enabling the usage of the battery as a storage system, so a better acceptance from the energy responsible on network in general, up to then additional future option, more for the future, like autonomous robot or battery swapping or wireless charging. So technology is available. Then the question is how to deal with those options, how to enforce the acceptance by the private sector, by the citizen, by an action, by policy from the public administration. As mentioned, we have still some gap to take over, to fulfill, lack of homogeneous interoperative diffusion in Europe. Not all the charging station vehicles are 100% mapped and available to be used. We have still a strong range anxiety, not having enough charging station everywhere, in some part of Europe particularly. And then we have the problem of the impact on the energy grid, on the energy network, of the peak of those consumption. On the other side, for the vehicles, we have a high cost of the vehicles, the autonomy of the battery, and the option, which is somehow to investigate or to enhance on the network of vehicle to grids. So from our project, and I'm going to almost the conclusion, but the hardest part of this presentation is about which kind of experience can we deliver. On one side, we have a lot of best practice collected and case that we were trying to enhance through our action plans in the project e-MOPOLI. But moreover, we use as a lighthouse or as a reference Norway, the history of Norway, the policy they were diffusing, one of our partners in particular, and in which way the last year e-vehicles were the majority of the vehicles sold on the market. So incentives, so taxation, so way to diffuse alternatives in a country which definitely we know is a bit peculiar compared to other parts of Europe. We had a lot of opportunity. So policy from a public initiative, we have a good and I will define stable mid or long-term planning and strategy, which are really important also for the urban and spatial planning, having an impact obviously in the diffusion of ECS and therefore to give opportunity for e-vehicles mobility, for private user, for public user, buses and so on. Then we have to work on the incentives, obviously for research innovation to couple the knowledge at the research competence center university and create a good partnership, particularly in the field of public transport, but also in the other, in order to support where the market is fading with a proper sharing of planning and sharing the profit deriving by this. It's really important then awareness, therefore campaign in order to inform a user, but also, if I may say, capacity building for public administration to share the knowledge of the opportunity of the private sector within the public administration. On the other side, the problem is how to make economical sustainable the business about e-mobility. So how to create a good investment, how to provide a continuous chain about the service provided, how to link private sector to university again and create a good cooperation. So the key word for me, for us, is synergy. Synergy about public and private in order to show that we have this opportunity ready to be used and to be diffused, and particularly consistent planning and coherencies. In this way, I will conclude with this short or small slide we've taken from some experience for USA, therefore abroad. But generally, the real point for me is to remind that we have a loop, first of all, from the point of view of the users, the circle you can see, the gray circle, where we expect to diffuse e-mobility based on the safety perception of as user. So not range anxiety, availability of ECS, but to have ECS available, obviously the private investor expects to have a lot of cars driving, and having cars means to have a sustainable or reliable infrastructure for the energy, and then create the visibility which enforce again the perception by the citizen. So based on this kind of loop, and that is the picture that the public administration has to, let's say, understand, we have to work on the three levels. So what we did, or we have completed during the last period in terms of cooperation with private sectors, in terms of development of good planning up to the next medium-term investment in order to harmonize policy, in order to create a good market condition, up to the future or long-term investment in order to create a better network, a cooperation on the energy grid, and a diffusion of the large-scale investment in order to diffuse. I was asked to be really short and concise, so I wanted just to give you some highlight about what we did in our project and different experience, but just to say that the main point for me, again, is a synergy about private partnership, private and public sectors on one side, and really consistent planning to ensure the business model for the private sector. That's from my side. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Guido. Great presentation and a real comprehensive one. I think synergy is the key word, I would say, from this presentation. And so a lot of challenges that we're facing now and that we'll be facing also in the near future. I would like to ask you one question about fast charging. So in your opinion, what would be the best model to further expand fast charging along the highways, either using existing gas stations or through dedicated EV charging hubs?
Well, let's say the most simple answer will be use the existing, because it's existing, because as a user, we perceive the existence of those stations and we already used to stop there. So there is no question, since we can make this scale up on the different alternatives. But on the other side, the most trickiest answer will be why we don't have yet, or why the private investors are not yet diffusing the ECS unless for some specific business model or in some country. Then the question is how to support this location by proper planning, by support and financing, or by some law to oblige the fuel station to have those alternatives. I would say the better solution is at least start with a good planning, having a normative to enforce scheduling for those diffusion first, and having agreement in order to give the good opportunity of this diffusion. But for me, it's no sense to create something else, even if the time of charging will be a bit longer, obviously, than fuel station at this stage and technological development. But still, you know, there are locations that are most visible for the citizen. So let's go for what is simple, you know, the keep it simple approaches.
Great, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So we have one question that's come in through the chat. I think, Nikos, you were done. Yes, okay. So let me adapt this slightly. So Guido, I'd like to ask, how have the e-MOPOLI regions explored adaptation of building codes to include, for example, obligations for the installation of charging infrastructure in new buildings? Is this something that the project has looked into?
Well, actually, if I correctly understand the question, it's because I was shortly reading while I listened to you, so not that it was not clear, obviously. In Lombardy, for instance, but in other regions in Italy, we have normative obliging for certain restoration of new building or for new building development of certain dimension that you are obliged to have a potential link to charging station. The step forward will be to oblige to have charging station, not only the potential link, but that's the point. But for industrial premises, restoration zone is obliged to have a short notice. That is really the build point. So give the opportunity to the people, particularly in being condom, to have those opportunity or to create space for public charging, to diffuse also the idea, what is the concept, and then perceive it. That is possible. So that is really something we can do, not really as a zero cost or give incentives. We have a lot to do during this period to diffuse it. So that is really effective.
Thank you very
Yes,
much.
I believe there's also the obligation in the revised buildings directive. Yeah, that links for the first time the building sector to the mobility sector, where apartment blocks from a certain size on have to have both PV on the top and a charging in the parking. I don't know the cutoff, but the obligation is there. So it's going to be implemented and being compulsory in all the member states.
There is also, if I may, a really interesting option also from other countries outside Europe, where the big skyscrapers or buildings should not use any gas anymore, any fuel, but just purely electricity for heating and everything, enforcing the fusion of renewable energy, but also increasing the opportunity to have a strong network which are enabling charging ECS for the vehicles. So this is a different approach, but with the same result. So that could be also taken in consideration.
Interesting point. Thank you very much, Guido, for your keynote. And I would like to hand over to Stephanie Keßler from Hamburg about your experience with the charging for the e-buses. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Katharina. I'll share my screen with you. And here we go. Yes, I'm working on the eBussed project in Interact Europe for the city of Hamburg, and we are looking into the transition to electric mobility and public transport, and we'll be looking at some examples from Hamburg which relate to the topic of this webinar. So we have identified several good practices in this project. And these two are the ones that I'll be presenting shortly in this presentation. The first one is we call it depot charging versus opportunity charging, which basically means what do you have to look at, which aspects do you have to look at when you want to decide for one or the other to make an informed decision. And the other one is we called optimized charging infrastructure. And that's an example from one of the depots. So what does bus depot layout mean? How can you optimize it when introducing charging infrastructure, when switching from diesel buses to electric vehicles? Okay, I'll start with this one. So when we speak about depot charging and opportunity charging, there's basically two different strategies. The first one meaning that the buses are charged overnight at the depot. In some cases, they're being recharged during the day when they have split shifts and return to the depot, but sometimes they run all day. So they have quite a large battery pack on the roof to carry them like, well, more than 200 kilometers with one charging circuit. And most often they use plug-in charging for this type of charging. And the other one is the opportunity charging, is what we call opportunity charging, using superchargers en route. It's normally most commonly located at the terminal stops of the bus line, where the buses are then being recharged. But when we speak of this strategy, opportunity charging, we also mean that buses are obviously charged overnight at the depot, but then being recharged while they do their job. Okay, and what's important when we speak about making an informed decision is that that the authority or the public transport operator becomes clear of the different aspects that go into this decision, which is operational flexibility. For instance, in Hamburg, we have, I would say, almost exclusively depot charging, because buses do not go on one line from A to B and then back from B to A, and that do that from the morning till the evening. But in fact, they go on so-called tours, which means that a bus starts from A on line 1, goes to the terminal stop at B, and then carries on line 26 on another route. So we need more flexibility, and there's no point in building so many opportunity charging stations, because there are no real terminal stops for the buses. So that's mainly why they decided on Hamburg to go for the depot charging. There's also the price for the infrastructure, of course. What should not be neglected is the impact on bus drivers, because when you go for the opportunity charging, you have those large poles on the side of the road, and the buses need to stop underneath quite precisely. So that may cause some stress for the bus drivers. And also everything needs to go really smoothly and quickly so that passengers do not have to wait and so on. So that's an aspect. Then I already mentioned the distances driven. So whether you operate your public transport in rural areas where you have longer distances, or whether you are operating in very dense city centers, that surely influences whether you go for one or the other charging strategy. Also, the availability of public space is an aspect, because you have to build those quite large charging stations if you go for opportunity charging. On the other hand, you need to put up infrastructure in the depot. We'll come to that in the next example. But there's also limitations in the built environment. So if you have low clearance bridges, for instance, you have to make sure that the buses go underneath. If you go for pantograph up option, which means that the pantograph is mounted on the top of the bus, that may be a bit of a problem. On the other hand, if you want to go for depot charging and you need large battery packs on the roof, you may have weight restrictions, and batteries are quite heavy. So the bridges might not carry the bus anymore. And last but not least is the acceptance by the public is also not, a very crucial aspect. Here in Hamburg, they gained some experience with opposing public when there was a charging station in front of their house and people didn't like it. So yeah, all these things to look at. And also you have to bear in mind that some of these things are in the realm of public authorities, others can be decided by the transport operators, and some of them need to be negotiated really between several stakeholders. Okay, that's just a quick glimpse, and we'll jump to the next topic, which is the charging infrastructure at the depot. As I said, in Hamburg, we have almost exclusively the depot charging, so the depots are being retrofitted to host the infrastructure for plug-in charging overnight. But when we talk about e-bus operation, we talk about more buses and more space for the infrastructure than for a diesel bus depot. So you have to change the layout of the depots. And what they did in one case, the VHH is one of the Hamburg bus operators, transport operators. In one existing depot, they had very little space, so they thought, well, how can we host or accommodate the charging infrastructure? And they did it overhead. So they have like a pergola on the top. I'll show you a picture in a second. And they had all the power modules located in a wall, which functions as a firewall, not a digital one, but a real one. So in case of electric fire breaking out, they have this wall in between the buses. At the moment, this depot or the retrofitting is still under construction, but the costs are estimated to be lower than if you put up a charging station next to each bus, like a petrol station, where you have a plug to put in. But we'll see. This is what it's going to look like, and at the moment there's still some preparation work going on, so it's yeah, it's not done yet, but I think it can be an option. And this is going to host solo buses as well as long 18 meters articulated buses. So there is like a sled on a rail, so they can change the position of the plug if they have a longer bus to charge. Okay, and another example, and I just show you a few pictures about this, is a bus depot which is already in operation and has been opened in April 2019. That was built from scratch, so no retrofitting. It's 45,000 square meters large. In the final stage, it will be hosting 240 buses, solo and articulated. They built 6 carports for 40 buses each. At the moment, it's also hosting diesel buses, because the transformation hasn't been finished, of course. And they decided to put green roofs on those carports for microclimate, for better microclimate, and they do rainwater collection, and they use the rainwater for cleaning the buses. And they also needed a transformer station next to the depot. So this is what it looks like. And you can see from the blue cables coming down that they're the charging technology is also placed in the roof here. And this is what it looks like at night. I think that's quite a nice picture. As I said, there are some diesel buses in there at the moment, but it's going to be a fully electric depot. And there you can see again the technology in the roof. Yeah, so that's basically it. One final aspect I would like to mention is the fire safety. When you look at electric buses, and I think that's the same with electric cars, but buses are much bigger, so there's a bigger fire if they get on fire. So you have to think about preventive fire protection and about contingency plans. So that's a whole different story with e-buses. And unfortunately, I think we have to gain some experience with real fires to learn more about this, and a lot of research is being done. I would like to point out that there is an upcoming thematic article from the eBussed project, from one of our working groups on this topic. I think it's quite an important topic to look at, but we'll not do that today. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Stephanie, for this very interesting presentation on charging infrastructure for e-buses. As you mentioned, there are mainly 2 charging strategies, depot charging and opportunity charging. It seems for Hamburg, as you said, that the depot charging is the main option. But since other operators may consider opportunity charging, and as it involves delays of a few minutes for charging en route, do you think that this is in general acceptable by the passengers?
Yes, I do think so, because we do have partners in the eBussed project. Our lead partner in Turku, they have opportunity charging at the terminal stops of their bus line, their eBus line, and I have not heard of any complaints. That's all I can say. And I also think that in Utrecht, which is another partner in the eBussed project, they also do opportunity charging, and no complaints from their side. So I think that it is a viable option. And there are so many other aspects, as I said, the list that I presented is by far not complete. It's just to give people an idea of what they have to think about. But yes, delay is certainly one thing you have to look into and see if it works. But yeah, it's certainly an option.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Great.
Okay, and Stephanie, we have one question coming through the chat. That is from Rose, and she's asking, was there any consideration of installing PV on the roofs of the new bus stations?
PV meaning photovoltaic. Yes, indeed. There has been considerations, and Hochbahn, which is the transport operator of this depot I showed you, which is already in operation. They are right now building their next depot, eBussed depot, which will only host e-buses from the scratch, from the start. No diesel buses will go there, and that's where they put up PV on the roofs of those carports. In the case of Alsterdorf, the one of which I showed you the pictures, they have looked into it, but it was not yet a viable solution at that time because technology is developing so fast. And but apparently what I learned when I prepared this presentation is that you can even build photovoltaic on top of those green roofs. So you have like a win-win situation. You have rainwater collection, you have a bit of environment for the bees to collect their nectar, and but you can also collect energy from the sun at the same time. Yeah, so there's development going in that direction.
Yes, these are the recent trends where you also put the photovoltaic on top of agricultural areas to use the shading, still have the water and harvest the sun. So this is a super good use of space. Let's see what comes up next in this area.
Win-win-win.
Yes, exactly. Thank you very much, Stephanie.
Thank you.
And now we are going to look at charging stations, not for buses, but for well, smaller vehicles. And I'm very happy to have Gonçalo Pacheco here because the Portuguese MOBI.E network is one of the recognized really, really good practices, one of the not so many available currently in Europe. So Gonçalo, tell us all about how you approach the question of building this charging infrastructure. Floor is yours.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. So I'm the the manager of network and innovation at MOBI.E. And today I will talk to you about the history of MOBI.E and how we act in the market. Okay, so MOBI.E started as a vehicle of the government to invest in electric mobility. So since 2015, we had two main purposes. So putting in operation the EV charging network that was non-existent, and we acted as a CPO, AMSP, and a maintenance provider, assuring the uptime network and its evolution, and to act as a managing entity of electric mobility. So these are many challenges that a short team and a small investment was possible, but since 2015, we installed more than 2,000 charging stations. So right now, the market to charging 2,100 points of charge. Sorry. Right now, in the present, we have more than 2,100 charging stations, that there are more than 5,000 outlets, and we are in 96% of the municipalities. So since 2020, MOBI.E reached the full market stage. It started to act as a management entity for electric mobility, with all activity being handed over to the private sector. So right now, we are just the managing entity, and all the operation is delivered by the private sector. MOBI.E as a management entity monitors the network, checking its gasps and needs, and as a government vehicle for electric mobility, we invest sporadically with specific objectives, such as increase the network power and promote territorial cohesion, that is very important for Portugal right now. Our main lines of action are quite simple and self-explanatory. So we act as a promoter of electric mobility, as I said before, disseminating, demystifying, that is very important, and educating for change. We are entrepreneurs enabling new forms of business for our entities, and we act as a consultant trying to spread the best practice for operational, legislative, and regulatory issues. We are also the facilitator between the different sectors that are in different stages of maturation, such as the conventional electrical sector, the associated technology, and the very dynamic electric mobility sector. Thus, we develop our activity as an e-mobility hub and as a public entity for the development of sustainable mobility. Our model is quite simple and has one main purpose. So EV users right now have universal access to all the charging stations that are publicly accessible in Portugal. So EV user just needs to have one contract or an app that allows ad hoc payments to have access to all the charging stations in Portugal. So thus, EV users can charge in all CPO chargers with that contract or with that app without needing multiple apps, multiple contracts in order to charge in the different CPOs. The EMSPs buy energy to a retailer of the electrical system, and then they sell it to the EV user. So the EV user pays for two components: the CPO, that is a tariff for using the charging station, and to the EMSP, that is a tariff for the energy provided in that system. MOBI.E then collects all the data, and we inform the CPOs and the MSPs of the consumptions in order to support the billing process between them. And also, that's one of the major features that we have. We are integrated with the electrical sector. So we have two energies per se. So we have energy for electric mobility and the energy that is provided, and we deduct the mobility, the energy for the electrical cars from the conventional electrical sector. Okay, so that's one main feature, and allows mostly gains for the CPOs and the MSPs because they do not have to support the availability of power that is required to deploy a charging station. Our model is quite simple. So we try to design the best and the cheaper model for electric mobility, and we are ever evolving. So we integrate, regulate, and integrate with the electrical sector, as I said before. We have a public and private intervention is clearly regulated by the state. We try with this model to optimize. So we have a clear view of the whole system, and that provides us better management and the better use of resources, so we can invest, or we can give some advice to the operators where they should invest or they should not. We have the experience, so we are focused in delivering the best experience for everyone, especially to the EV users, so they have access to the entire MOBI network, and we allow that the private spaces, such as our homes or public spaces, could be integrated in one network. And our model provides a stronger competition between CPOs and EMSPs, because they always want to have the biggest market share, and they compete in equal conditions. So that's we think that's a nice model and the best practice. And we act as a technological hub with a very digital platform with automated procedures and interactions between all the entities. So as a mobility hub, we maintain the basic model. So universality of use and competition. We cooperate with the stakeholders in order to see what we can manage to do at the legislation level or in the operation level, act as a technological hub, and we are a reference for electric mobility data that is being required the most. As I said before, we are in a very good place because we interact with mobility sector entities and with electrical sector entities, providing a vertical integration between them. And to promote electric mobility in Portugal, in the short term, we are monitoring MOBI development, network development. We materialize the government policies. We have active contribution in legislation and regulations, both in Portugal and in the European Union. And as I said before, we have right now 2 major investments. So we are deploying 10 hubs of EV chargers and 12 ultra-fast chargers in order to promote territorial cohesion. Here are some graphics that I wanted to show you. So we have the evolution of the energy consumption, and since February of this year, we are breaking records each month, and we hope it evolves in this way. So what I can say for future lessons and recommendations, I would say that you need to be technological agile. So you need to be the first to implement standard protocols or new ways of communication. You need to monitorize and invest in your strategy. You need to stick to your strategy and collect the results of that. You need to be a pioneer and take part in pilots. Right now, we are part of multiple pilots programs regarding the PV use of coupled to charging stations, and also vehicle to grid operation systems. And most of all, I think, and I'm an engineer, and I think this part is a little bit, we lack the experience of operational problems. So you need to address operational problems seriously in order to your business to evolve in the fastest way. So we are a little bit ambitious, but I think that's the only way to bring the future to life. So thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Gonçalo. Great presentation of this very interesting, good practice. I think everybody understands how useful can be the operation of such a network in each country for the uptake of e-mobility. So my question is now, how easy is to replicate such a network, good practice like MOBI in other countries that have already an established EV charging infrastructure? And what are the limitations and the necessary resources to establish and operate such a system?
Okay, so this system, I think it's very used to replicate. There must be a will of the governments to replicate it. Okay, such it is a mandatory need for everyone to enter in the mobility sector in Portugal. Regarding charging stations, they need to be registered in the network, in the MOBI.E network, and we don't see this as a bottleneck, but as a facilitator. So we help everyone deploy their business, since they can be very big or a very small company. They all have the same opportunities of access to public deployment and public tenders. So they are everyone is in equal conditions. So that's one of the opportunities that we provide. In order to replicate, well, it has to be some legislation and regulation, of course, or the private entities should get together and deploy an equal model to ours. Okay, so it promotes electric mobility because it allows everyone to compete within each other, but allows the user to have a more simple experience in electric mobility and charging in electric mobility in a simpler way, because the rules are the same, and you as a user can use only one contract or only one app in order to charge in every station, and you are not limited to it. So I think that's the way that the public sector should view the electric mobility. So they need to provide universality of use to everyone.
Great. Thank you, Gonçalo.
I think competition within a shared standard towards the customer. That's
Yes.
A way to put it. And this is, of course, the gold, let's say, standard. And this is a standard that we're striving for.
Yeah, that's true.
Thank you very much for sharing it. And I'm sure that also our next presenter is referring to you, because you are a major good practice and really one to learn from and to look at. Thank you for your presentation, Gonçalo.
Thank you very much.
And I'm very happy to hand over to Maria Zarkadoula, a colleague of Nikos, also from CRES, and to talk a little bit about charging tariffs. It's a dry topic, but it's a very important topic because prices always give signals. So over to you, Maria.
Thank you, Katharina. Let me share my screen. Okay, I'm Maria Zarkadoula. I'm the head of Department for Transport and Environment, and we are currently running e-MOBICITY project in terms of Interreg Europe. And in terms of this project, we implemented a report review on the tariffs methodology in some countries. Which are Croatia, Portugal, Greece, Germany, Czech Republic, Slovenia, Italy, Hungary, Netherlands, and Ireland. In terms of this report, we examined the existing regulatory framework, the role of national regulatory authorities, and the role of distribution system operators. And of course, we saw how e-mobility development influenced the DCO role and the formulation of tariffs. The report is available at the link you see on the screen. And let's move on quickly to see some issues, how tariffs are designed. But first of all, the most important part is the network tariff. And this is because because electricity network tariffs are designed to cover cost of the distribution transmission electricity systems, to cover cost of high electricity production and cost at non-interconnected islands. This is the case of CRES. And of course, to cover the cost comes from power supply for vulnerable consumers, and to cover the payments from renewable energy producers. The electrification of transport will strongly influence the distribution systems, and that will cause a considerable cost for network users. And this is the reason that tariffs should be regulated. As mentioned before, national regulatory authorities and DCOs play a key role in regulating tariffs, and regulatory authorities have to fix or adopt or both the distribution network tariffs for DCOs, and DCOs will be could be one single or some hundreds. The number of DCOs differ from one country to another. But of course, policymakers at national, regional, and municipal level have a play to role, because they should take part at the negotiation phase when criteria and guidelines for tariff design models set up. What happens now? Currently, there is no dedicated charging tariffs for e-mobility, except for Portugal, Italy, and Spain. In most European countries, network tariffs are based on a combination of energy, power, and lump sum. In Croatia, the tariff model is based more on peak power, and the vast majority of member states' energy-based tariffs have a larger weight than power-based ones. In most countries, there is a differentiation on day-night tariffs, and because it's cheaper to charge at night. The most outcome of our investigation is that tariff methods should design in a way that does not stress the grid, that illustrate the actual cost comes from the power demand. Generally, nowadays there is a shift towards more power-based tariffs. In Italy, we have dedicated energy-based tariffs for operators of public charging points. There is absence of fixed charges, and there are incentives particularly favorable for new public charging points in areas with scarce penetration of electric vehicles. In Portugal, this is the case that mentioned from Gonçalo. There is a dedicated management entity called MOBI.E, and we have dedicated regulated electric vehicle charging tariffs. There is interoperability. This means that users can access the country regardless who is the charging point operator through a single access mean card. Also, there is a specific tariff regime for self-consumption according to renewable energy communities. In order to understand better and give a sense why we need to design tariffs properly, I will show you a figure. with a figure with a load in a typical winter or summer day in city of Katharina in Greece. And you can see in the figure that the black line is the typical, the initial load without electric vehicles. And this is the load that happens for 24 hours. And the blue line shows electric vehicles, specifically shows that electric vehicle users, when arrive home from work, in after 5 and 6 o'clock, and start charging for a few hours, creating a peak demand. This is the case of non-controlled EV charging. We have extra load coincides with peak demand. The red line concerns EV charging by using the nighttime tariff, but it happens in a specific time range in the same time, and creates also a peak and a stress on the grid. The green line is filling the valley, and what happens when we have this ideal situation? Each electric vehicle user keep the individual load low, and it takes more time to charge, resulting in a reduction of the load simultaneous of the total simultaneous load of the grid. This is the smart control charging, and in order to fill this valley, and smart charging requires incentives to the network users. So in order to wrap up, what we need dedicated electric vehicle charging tariffs in all countries. Fixed charging tariffs do not promote efficiency. Low-cost charging is achieved when tariff models better respond to individual future of the grid by giving incentives to limit and spread the load. We need also smart tariffs and dynamic tariffs in the future for the most efficient use of the grid. Of course, we need interoperability. We have to charge our EV everywhere, and of course, we need smart platforms to enable transparency and easy comparison of charging tariffs. Specifically regarding mobility and charging, tariffs should be easy to understand and transparent. Has to allow to derive business models and a viable business model in sparsely populated areas such as rural areas or small islands. And of course, tariffs should promote the uptake of e-mobility. And all this will happen while maintaining the safe and efficient network operation. This is all. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Maria. Thank you, Maria, for this very interesting presentation, this overview of EV charging tariffs in the EU. So, as you mentioned, there are many different strategies for the EV charging tariffs in the EU. My question is, do you think it's possible actually to adapt to one single model across the EU?
Yes, the investigation we made through our report showed that one appropriate tariff model may be not fit in other networks or in other countries. So in this way, a common European model, mainly for distribution network tariffs, is not feasible, taking into account the national circumstances that can differ significantly. For example, increase the tariffs need to cover the increased cost of decentralized energy production on the non-interconnected islands, which is not the case in other European countries. Also, as the share of renewables will increase, there will be greater need for adjustment of energy fluctuation. And we need, of course, to see more dynamic tariff models to be implemented in the future. As mentioned in my presentation, only a few countries so far has proceeded in dedicated EV charging tariffs due to low penetration of e-mobility up to now. It seems that dedicated EV charging tariffs are not a top priority for now, at least. But as the penetration of e-mobility increases, it is expected that more countries will come up to define another tariff model in order to ensure stability and efficiency of the network.
Great, thank you, Maria.
But it is a very complex task to define a proper tariff model.
Yeah, but I mean, the main point is some people might ask themselves, why is it so bad? If there is a peak, can we not just accommodate this? Actually, the fact is that it is very costly, because it will require really hard infrastructure investments in additional generation capacity, maybe in additional lines, in transformers. So this is much more expensive than designing a smart system that provides the right incentives to fill the valleys, as you have nicely shown it. Thank you very much.
This is a challenge.
Yes. By the way, we have had a webinar on the impact of transport electrification on the grid with partners from the setup and the EV energy projects back in 2 years ago. And I think my colleague will paste a link to that in the chat that goes into much more depth along the line of the last slides of Maria's presentation. You might want to check it out. It's quite interesting, I think. So let's move on to our panel discussion. I would like to ask all the speakers to turn on their camera. And let's see. So we have seen that charging potentially puts a lot of stress on the grid. And so I would like to further move into this discussion. What can be done by regional and local policymakers, not at the national level, to reduce this stress? Are there any incentives, any ideas that can help smooth this out? And I would like to give the floor to all our speakers one by one. Maybe we start with Guido.
Yeah, first of all, we have to understand the dimension of regions, because if we're speaking about Lombardy, 10 million inhabitants is like a medium country. Therefore, the financial power to support the grid and to work together with also the DSO and the other, it's much stronger than some other small regions that obviously are more accepting what the DSO are doing in this sense in terms of grid. So it's quite tricky. For me, the general element that common for each region is to have a really good, consistent planning, long-term planning to decide where to put what. And this is the first issue. The second point is to invest on strategy for what the regions are dealing with, are responsible for what, which is first of all public transport. Since they are financing public transport, they may decide in which way to use which kind of vehicles. And that is a really internal, easy and zero cost, at least at planning. Then obviously you have to pay for the vehicles, the buses, but that is already a good, healthy issue to, let's say, enlighten also the citizens about e-mobility that is working, and give you a really good example. And for the provider, having a good plan for where to invest on what. So for me, that's the common element, whatever the dimension of regions we are talking about.
let's go in the order of appearance.
Yes, I can only second what Guido just said, because in Hamburg we have this particular situation that the grid provider is owned by the city, and both the two large transport operators are owned by the city. So it's quite a nice situation that when there is a policy or a strong political will to change things, then it can be implemented on the ground just by telling those companies, okay, this is what you should do. And I'm not an expert in these things, but as far as I've learned within our project, it seems to work quite nicely, because they are in constant exchange, and the grid provider has developed a tool for specifically in the first place for the transport operators, but that can also be used in other contexts, which works quite nicely. So I think that's a situation which is not the same in other cities, but in Hamburg that's what it's like, and it works.
Yes, I agree with Guido. So the local authorities need to plan ahead and have a very good knowledge of how the people in their city move from where to where, so residential zones to the center zones, and to deploy or to demand to deploy different charging stations according to this pendular movement. Also, another way to incentive and to distress the grid, and as Maria said, the implementation of smart tariffs. Okay, so you can have less costly tariffs during the night than during the day, and these will encourage people to level the grid use during the whole day.
Okay, Maria.
Yes. Yes, I believe that local administration or regional administration could provide incentives in order to control charging load of the electric vehicles. So to this direction, the municipalities could offer maybe reduced communal use and taxes for users who charge EVs during off-peak times. And of course, I agree with the other speakers that municipalities could also develop a communication plan on e-mobility for their citizens, stakeholders, to aware them for the benefits by shifting charging from peak to off-peak periods, and to benefit from this behavior.
There's certainly a lot of education needed, because the incentives have to be really in line with with the generation curve, more ideally, and filling the valleys where the load is below the generation. So a lot of cooperation is needed in a specific context. I also understand that it cannot be one solution for each country, and even probably for certain parts of very big countries. So do you think that there is enough cooperation already going on between, let's say, the grid operators and those who design the incentives for e-vehicles? I mean, in the absence of a national player like MOBI.E, because probably you organize this this communication, sitting together between the generation and the charging. Yeah.
Yes, we provide integration between the network operator, the grid operator, and all those entities. And we have access to data from e-mobility and the electrical sector in those points. So that is that is the ease of use of our network for our entities as well. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Maria's report shows that. Yeah.
I think that there is a correlation between generation, distribution, transmission network, and distribution network, and then we have the consumption part. But this is why it's very important the role of the regulatory authorities. I think that they have already a very important role, but I think that they will have a more crucial role in the future. Because imagine when we will have many of the electric vehicles on the road, and then we need a very strong enough grid, a lot of generation plants, of course, renewable plants connected to the system, and in order to have a good collaboration of all of them, the role of regulatory authorities and the role of distribution system operators are going to be very crucial. And of course, the other parts of our society, such as regional or municipal authorities, they have to play also a key role, because they could be part of the general consultation of all this model.
I think, Gonçalo, you mentioned energy communities. So renewable energy communities, or maybe it was in Maria's report that renewable energy communities which produce renewable electricity have preferential tariffs. Would that mean that they cannot simply consume the electricity that they are producing, but they are paid for what they give to the grid, but still they can buy it for their EV charging at a preferential tariff? Or how does that go? How does it go for the self-producing and self-consuming individual or community?
Okay, so that's a hard question because we are still working in the model, but we see the charging station as a point of delivery of the energy to the network. Okay, so we consider, or at least we are trying to consider that. So community energies will be rewarded by those energy that is sold to the network. Okay, and also the user will have a preferable tariff in those charging stations. We still don't know if it is as a CPO tariff or a EMSP tariff, but we are working on that. Well, that's the spirit that we want to have. So it's a win-win for all. And well, we are still working on that. I hope in the next few months we have some good news and we can share it with you.
Interesting. Guido, I think you wanted to contribute.
Yeah, I think this point about the local energy community is really tricky and interesting, because by the local energy community, you can enforce the concept of prosumer. And obviously, if the prosumer is the one using himself energy for his car, it's by self-interested to have a e-car. And obviously, he will have on his condom or the location of the production also the ECS. So extending the normative, increasing the power of the local energy community dimension, it's really a good policy in order to make free this concept and to create a condition for the circular economy on energy for a motivational aspect as well. So that is really something that we have to support from regional level up at national level, obviously.
And it leverages the private investment for the charging infrastructure that would otherwise
Exactly.
have to be done.
Scale up with a larger diffusion, definitely the point, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Another question. Now, there are so many different models for chargers, and the question about the interoperability is really pressing. What do you recommend to regional and local administrations to future-proof the investment, the public support that is somehow given to the rollout of infrastructure? How to make sure that it is not invested in one model which becomes obsolete because a dominant standard is emerging a couple of years later? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, I have some thoughts, sorry, Guido, but regarding light vehicle duties, the standards are well established, okay? So we are working with 3 types of connectors that we don't foresee any change on that. So all the deployment of infrastructure should be done by that. Regarding protocols of communication, we have 2 main protocols of communication between the chargers and backends as a CPO, as a MOBI network, that is OCPP, Open Charge Point Protocol, and or CPI, Open Charge Point Interface. And well, local authorities can use that as a standard and like a bulletproof, because those are the protocols that are evolving in the future, and they are every year they launch a new version of that protocol, and they should implement it.
On my side, definitely to enforce the coupling, the twinnings between public administration, university, and research center, and also the inclusion of the third ethics for the private sectors. Because if we enforce the public-private partnerships, first of all, we have opportunity to fast tracking of the innovation technologies and make a capacity building for the public administration. We have a gap of knowledge often. Secondly, we create a condition of free market and addressing the proper funds, S3 strategies, so regional operational plans can be really the instrument if we, as public administration, are aware about what's going on from the public partnership. So it's really important to keep the dialogue open as much as possible. And yeah, this kind of learning action, not to use the wording of Interreg Europe, but actually using, are really a key point to be not old-fashioned with our decision investment or planning wrong ECS in the wrong location. That's really a point for me. Dialogue, synergy before, yeah.
Okay, can I add something on this? Yes, I think that in Portugal things are more easier than other countries because there is MOBI example. So this authority, this entity could ensure the interoperability. What had to be done in other countries in order to ensure interoperability? Of course, there is an extra cost, infrastructure cost, in order to be able, everyone user to charge their cars. Maybe we have to see another option for this to have a transfer cost to private companies. And there is a good example for this, the example of Amsterdam in the Netherlands, that the metropolitan region Amsterdam Electric has awarded the largest in Europe concession contract. And in that way, the local authority has transferred the extra cost for infrastructure to a private company. And this is a good option, I think. And of course, each authority, each municipality should produce a plan, a detailed plan regarding EV charging infrastructure positioning. And in Greece, each municipality is obliged until the end of this year to deliver a local charging infrastructure plan. And I think that this is good options to ensure interoperability.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. Stephanie, do you have any thoughts on that?
Not really, but once again, I can only stress what the others have said, that it's a matter of dialogue. I think Guido said to keep the dialogue open, and that's what needs to be done. Yeah, there's nothing carved in stone, and technology is developing. So all we can do is keep in touch and collaborate and monitor and follow that process of development, and so that we don't run into technological lock-in or anything similar. Yeah.
Yes, Guido.
Interesting point. It's really important also to work together among different sectors of the public administration, because traditionally we have a mobility planner, energy planner, industrial developer, or a spatial planner. We have to work in a different setting from the public administration, because otherwise we're looking for one sectoral aspect, but now e-mobility is about all those 3-4 elements together. So if the public administration at regional level are not affecting their internal dialogues, then it's really a failure. No way to deal purely with mobility independent now, because it's not exogenous, the energy produced for the mobility anymore. So at local level, we can be the one dealing with every aspect. So if the public administration are not synergic internally, then no way to be also open to dialogue with operators of public transport, private sector, and so on. So that's another lesson learned from our project, really clearly in the problem we were facing.
This is already sounding like a closing statement, and it is also the time for it. I wanted to ask each of you to make a short statement about the main takeaways from today's webinar. Guido, I give you the possibility to complete what you've just said, or you can say, this is it, and then pass on to the next.
This is it for me, really keeping the dialogue open among the internal sectors and private citizen and private sectors of the quadruple helix. That is it for me, definitely. Thank you, and the floor is for the next speaker. Thank you.
Good. Stephanie.
Yeah, well, my main takeaway of today is probably that that there are so many similar things going on in different regions, and only in this rather small round, I noticed that there are things that we should be comparing. So I will look a bit closer at MOBI.E to see in what respect it is similar to what the grid provider here in Hamburg, Stromnetz Hamburg, has developed in a project called eRound, whether it is the same or in what respects it is different. So I'll look into that and see if I can put people in touch and see if there is some benefit for both if they exchange each other. Yeah.
I can offer for the policy learning platform to help you and organize this. We can provide the infrastructure. You say who you want to speak to, you select the people on your side, and we organize this in form of an online meeting. Don't hesitate to contact me for that.
Yeah, I'll check back with my stakeholders and then I'll let you know. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, Gonçalo?
Okay, so I think Guido said all in the presentation. So we have to put synergies between the private sector and the public sector. And well, we have to take the best of each practice and put it all together. So that's it.
Easy. Okay, and Maria?
Okay, in my opinion, the first and the most important step for each municipality and region is to proceed fast with the development of a local charging infrastructure plan, and then try to communicate it to all citizens, stakeholders, and so on. And of course, we need from authorities to give incentives to local citizens in order to charge their cars in the most appropriate way. And finally, I would also like to mention that due to Interreg Europe and other EU-funded programs, there is available a huge amount of information regarding e-mobility and charging infrastructure for the local and regional administration. Therefore, I encourage you to visit e-mobility related projects and of course EMOBICITY and learn about the good practices and download any file you might be interested.
Thank you. Very valid point. Anybody listening who is not involved in an e-mobility project in Interreg Europe is eligible also for a peer review service. So you do not have to sit all on your own and download and read, but you can request a peer review, and we organize a 2-day intense exchange with 4 to 5 handpicked experts for you. So make use of that service if you're not yet involved in any e-mobility projects, so because that would involve double funding. It's time for me to close and to thank all the speakers and especially my co-moderator Nikos for the active support, your excellent presentations and contributions to the discussion. It has been very instructive. In the chat, you could see some positive feedback from our participants who have overall been very quiet, but I think the animation of the discussion has been lively just the same. And so, yeah, thank you for everybody. This is the second webinar in the row. Next week, Tuesday afternoon at the same time, we have the final one. We will talk about the integration of e-mobility strategies in broader territorial planning. So again, this will touch upon the last topics that we've been speaking about, not just talking about mobility, but the other areas as well. So you see the registration link in the chat. And I would also like to advertise our upcoming webinar on building a regional hydrogen economy coming on 8th of February. It is not directly, not only linked to mobility, but looking at hydrogen as another, let's say, energy carrier is also interesting because cars running on hydrogen are also electric vehicles in some way. So it was a pleasure. I wish you all an excellent afternoon and goodbye to everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye.